Oh no, this is terrifyingly horrific. Leave this to happen on the Halloween episode of Get Real. We never should have made fun of Ishtar on the season premiere of the Smokin' Hot Toddcast, because look what's happened. Ishtar Director's Cut on Blu-ray. An Ishtar button. An Ishtar sticker. And an Ishtar poster. The horror. The horror. Ah. Boogity boogity boo! Hello, I'm Hot Toddy, and welcome to the spooky Halloween episode of Get Real. This is an extremely special episode of Get Real. This is one that I have been excited about and anticipating for about 2 years now. Because 2 years ago, we celebrated the 100th anniversary of The Hunchback of Notre Dame, one of the crucial early Universal horror movies. I use horror in quotations because really the horror comes from Lon Chaney's makeup as The Hunchback of Notre Dame. It really wasn't a scary movie, but it was celebrating its 100th anniversary in 1923. It starred the great Lon Chaney, and I knew that 2 years from then, in 2025, we would be celebrating the 100th anniversary of really what is looked at as the first major horror film, aside from Nosferatu, which actually was banned in a lot of countries because it was illegally made. They didn't get the rights from the Bram Stoker estate, or all of that. It was a whole legal ordeal. So this is looked at as like the real first major horror film, so much so that it was the catalyst that kicked off the classic Universal horror films, which would later include Dracula, Frankenstein, The Invisible Man, The Mummy, so on and so forth. It is The Phantom of the Opera, the 1925 silent classic starring the man of a thousand faces, Lon Chaney. That is why I had managed to fly out to France. I can't believe I was able to do this. I managed to fly out to Paris, France. I'm here at the Paris Opera House. I'm deep within the bowels of the Opera House, in the catacombs where the Phantom dwells in the terrifying story that is The Phantom of the Opera. Originally written by Gaston Leroux as a novel in 1910, it went on to become a huge motion picture event in 1925 when Carl Laemmle bought the movie rights. He was, of course, the founder and president of Universal Studios at that time, and he bought them for really the only person who could do this role. That was the late, great Lon Chaney. And oh my, did he do this role. Again, there's really nobody that could have taken on this role than Lon Chaney, without a doubt. Obviously, I'm an Uber fan. As you can see, I'm wearing my Phantom of the Opera t-shirt, and of course, like I said, I'm here in France. I'm literally here in the catacombs of the Paris Opera House, and that's why I'm here, is to celebrate 100 years of the Phantom of the Opera. And oh, what a film! This film is historic for its terror. People still talk about it to this day. Thank God it's not a lost film, because could you imagine if The Phantom of the Opera was lost? Again, 2 years ago, I talked about London After Midnight. I did a whole video about that movie, also starring Lon Chaney, but that is a film that is lost to time. Nobody knows where it is. The last known copy of it was burned in a fire many, many years ago, sometime in the early 1960s, I believe, and there's never been a new copy found since. But yet it has taken on huge popularity of itself because of its lore. The fact that we don't know anything really about it, no one probably living has seen it. It's become like this crazy thing, and it's become one of my favorite movies, and I haven't even seen it. But thankfully, London After Midnight, we're still looking for. It could be out there, we don't know, but we do know that the Phantom of the Opera is still out there, and it is one of the most incredible films to ever be on the silver screen. The movie was beautiful. You know, they built an entire stage. This was one of the early films where they built big studios, big stages for the film. The first time they really did it was 2 years earlier for The Hunchback of Notre Dame. They built the giant facade of the Notre Dame Cathedral, and had built these giant sets within a sound stage. And then right next to it, in the next year, they built historic Stage 28, which housed the Phantom of the Opera. And what was amazing about that is they filmed the movie there, and that stage stayed there for 89 years. It was the only classic movie era stage that they kept, and they kept it for 89 years because it became a historical place. It was never deemed like a full-on historical site, so they did sadly, unfortunately, tear it down in 2014. But like I said, up until then, it was a studio that people could go and visit, and it had all the entire opera set and everything like that. Like, I mean, it was beautiful to see, and they filmed a ton of movies in that studio, including the 1943 remake starring Claude Rains of The Phantom of the Opera. They did that one, and they did a bunch of other movies as well, because it was just a great spot to do. You could transform that opera into any opera house anywhere in the world. I mean, it was perfect that way. So that movie was famous for having this giant set built. It was one of the first movies to ever do that. And they found some fantastic actors of that time to play the characters. It was directed by schlock auteur. Maybe that was a good way to put him. He was definitely melodramatic in real life. I don't know if you would call them that in his professional life, but definitely in real life he was a widely dramatic person. Rupert Julian. We're going to talk about him here in a little bit. He's kind of a controversial figure in this whole thing, but he directed one hell of a movie. We'll give him that. And the movie, like I said, it's held up. I mean, it's still... all the other Phantoms really pale in comparison to this Phantom. This is the Phantom that all the other Phantoms in the future strived to be, but it just was not there. You can never grasp that real horror that this movie brought. And that's weird to say. A movie from 1925 was that terrifying. Oh, it was. The movie, it was so terrifying that people fainted in theaters. People ran out of the theaters in terror when Lon Chaney took his mask off, and his amazing makeup was filling the screen. Like, it was just incredible to see.
And I started to build this moment to Russie. And he says, how close were we to that moment? And just as we got to it, he says, I've got to see my mother. Walked out the theater.
And people were screaming, running away. They fainted. People were told, you're watching this movie at your own risk. And then all publicity shots for the film were held. Anything that had Lon Chaney's face in it were either held until after the movie came out, or they just didn't exist. Even the poster, the main poster of the film, doesn't really give you very much to work with in terms of the Phantom, but you know that this is a movie about somebody who's up to no good. But yeah, I mean, that's how incredible this movie was it really brought a lot of gravitas, not just for Universal Pictures, but for film in general. No one had seen a horror movie like this before, and it just absolutely struck people as something so terrifying. And like I said, to this day, that makeup still holds up. I guess that's what we really need to get into now, is Lon Chaney's performance in the film. He was a great actor. He was a fantastic silent actor. He proved in 1930 and the talkie version of The Unholy Three done by MGM that he was on the road to be a great talking actor as well.
That's all there is to life. Just a little laugh, a little tear.
Unfortunately, he was taken from us too soon, died of lung cancer in 1930. But his portrayals of characters in the 1920s lives on, and this is probably the most memorable one because the Phantom is such a menacing character. He starts out as someone very sympathetic, and then at the drop of a hat, he turns into this crazed madman, angry at the world, angry at Christine for taking his mask off. And it's like I said, future Phantoms really tried to base their performance on what Lon Chaney did, but no one could really do it quite like him. And I think that's also a credit to the silent movie era, because, you know, like I said, the silent era was more about melodrama. It was more about physical drama and physical acting than it was about talking and acting. So those movements and being able to you know, move like music during that time period, that's what really made you a great actor. And Lon Chaney could do it, and his facial expressions are terrifying in that makeup, because he looks like the embodiment, he looks like the description of what the Phantom is in Gaston Leroux's novel, like a skull head, you know. It's basically someone with barely any skin on his head, barely any hair, and he looks like a skull. And that's what we get, and that's the end result, was Lon Chaney's makeup. And it's just absolutely incredible what he was able to accomplish. He also went through a lot of pain to create that character. You know, he used fish prongs to push up his nose to make it look like the Phantom didn't have a nose, and it caused a lot of bleeding, unfortunately. But that was the thing about Lon Chaney, was that he didn't care. He would suffer for his art. And that's something very important that I haven't mentioned yet. The fact that he did his own makeup. I think I mentioned this in the London After Midnight review, but it doesn't get said enough just how amazing he was, not just as an actor, but as a makeup artist himself. He had his own makeup kit and created these ghoulish looking characters from this little box that he has, which still exists today. It's housed in the Natural History Museum of Los Angeles County, so it's in California, and you can go see it to this day, because it is an amazing piece of history. Again, where actors may have strived to top the Chaney performance in the Phantom and future Phantom films, artists, makeup artists, tried to strive to try to recreate that monstrous character that he created in 1925. And I mean, don't get me wrong, there have been some magnificent, monstrous characters over the course of the last 100 years that have come out of, you know, studios and makeup artists, but there's something about Chaney that he just made his character so, it's hard to find the words, and especially for the Phantom, he made that character just so normal. You know what I mean?
No.
It was a ghoulish face, but there wasn't all these like huge prosthetics. It wasn't like all these crazy, it was even less done for the Phantom than the Hunchback of Notre Dame, because in the Hunchback of Notre Dame, Lon Chaney had to put a hump on his back and literally take a piece of rope and pull himself down so that he could walk around like the Hunchback. So he did more work for that than he did for the Phantom, and yet the Phantom is more memorable, crazy enough. And that's just a credit to his work. He just made it so nonchalantly that it was just easy for him to do. And that's why when we lost him, we really lost an artist, not just through acting, but we lost a true makeup artist. Now, the thing about it is, when we got into the 1930s, I think the rules were changed in Hollywood that you had to have an actual licensed makeup artist to do makeup on films, whether it be just normal powder in the face or if you're creating a full character. So I'm not sure where the legalities would have lied for him once we got into the talking era, but I know for one thing, I don't know where we would be without him during the 20s, because like I said, so many makeup artists were inspired by what he did in his films, most notably The Phantom of the Opera, to create their ghoulish creatures as well. This movie may have had one of the toughest productions in film history. I mean, I know there's been plenty of movies that have had notorious hard productions, but this one went through so many different issues. Getting back to Rupert Julian, I mentioned him a little while ago. He was the director of the film. He's the credited director of the film. And he shot the film, and it wasn't fully up to par to Universal's liking. They saw the dailies, and it was just like, this isn't really flying with us. And then they actually did a test screening, and people were not impressed. They were less than impressed, to say the least. And Rupert Julian was just a notoriously hard person to work with. He was always getting into arguments with his actors. Norman Carey, who played Raoul in this movie, it was said that he got on a horse, because again, if you watch this movie proper, you don't see him on a horse. There's scenes that you don't see, and we'll talk more about that, but there's scenes that you don't see, but apparently at one point he was going to be on a horse, and and Rupert Julian made him so mad that he got on his horse, jumped up on the stage where Julian was sitting, and just charged at him with the horse and brought down cameras and everything. It was a big mess, apparently, from what we understand. What's crazy about Rupert Julian was that he was sort of like the new go-to director from Universal Studios. He was kind of the Sean Levy of his time. He was kind of that guy that everybody knew that they could rely on to make a good movie. At least they thought, because he had directed a movie a couple of years before called Merry-Go-Round, and apparently he did a magnificent job with that. But then they found out what a mediocre director he was with the Phantom of the Opera. Like, he just wasn't getting stuff done. Everything just looked bland. It just was not working. One of the things that kept changing during production was the ending of the film. They couldn't decide how to end this movie. In the book, it ends with the Phantom basically softening and changing, kind of coming back to reality and changing his mind about the whole abducting Christine and making her marry him and all that, and be like, just go, it's fine, I'm sorry, after she shows him affection by kissing him. The way it was going to work was that Christine was going to agree to marry Eric to save Raoul. So she kisses his forehead after he saves Raoul, and he's completely changed. And after having some affection, because he's never been touched by another human being, he's never felt love before in his life, he's so overcome by the feeling of affection that it breaks his heart and it kills him. And so he dies at his organ playing Don Juan Triumphant. And there are some production stills that still exist from this scene that was going to make it into the film, but they eventually dropped that because once the film was done and they showed a viewing of it in Los Angeles, people hated it. I believe, I have it written down here, too much spook melodrama was what the audience said. And it's like, well, yeah, that's what this movie is. It's melodrama, and it's horror. So what did you expect?
2 banana daiquiris, 1 mango, slow gin fizz, 1 slippery nipple, and for me, a screaming orgasm on the beach with extra sugar on the rim. Yum!
They're like, fine, okay. So they went back and reshot some of the film and put comedic scenes in. Chester Conklin, who was a very popular comedian during the 1920s, they shot scenes with him being the comic relief, kind of like, and it just felt like stuff that was outside the Phantom of the Opera, but it's like, okay, whatever, we need to put this in here because people were like, it's too heavy, make it a little funny. So they did that, had another screening. People despised it. They said it was horrible. Why would you put funny stuff in here? Where's all the spook melodrama?
Directly up your ass and to the left.
So they reshot it again. And finally, this was the version that ended up coming out in theaters in 1925. And they changed the ending. And I don't know if this is for the better. I've debated about this for most of my adult life as to what would have been the better ending. To do the whole melodramatic, affectionate ending where he dies at his organ, or the one that they ended up going with, which was more Texas-style justice for the Phantom. Because in the movie, there's a mob coming for the Phantom at the end, and he dies before they are able to get to him. And so that was the original ending with the kiss and everything like that. And the ending they went with, he has that moment of recollection, like, okay, I will save Raoul for you. And then once he sees Raoul and Christine showing affection for each other, he goes mad with anger. About that time, the mob is showing up and he's like, fuck that, I'm out of here. And he steals Christine. He gets onto a stagecoach and he rides off at top speeds with the mob chasing him down the road. He ends up crashing. They catch up with him and they end up beating him to death and throwing him into the river. That's the ending that they went with. That was the ending that made everybody happy. Like, this man had to die. Yes, he has mental illness. Yes, he's ugly, not by choice, but he had to die, all right? And that's kind of where I get back to where he's a sympathetic character, the Phantom. In every version, he's a sympathetic character until he goes mad and turns into this I'm going to get what I want or everybody's going to die type of situation. And then that's where you lose people and they're like, I don't like that. So that's the ending they went with. And you know, again, I would love to have seen that original ending. I would have loved to have seen that more compassionate, more melodramatic ending. But I guess I'm leaning more towards, yeah, I think this was the better route, just because I do believe that Texas style justice, because again, inadvertently, the Phantom of the Opera started the classic Universal horror monsters. All of those horror monsters had to die horrible deaths because they are monsters. Even though he is mortal, he's still a monster technically, so they had to kill him the right way, I guess. I don't know.
Okay.
So they did the movie, it came out, and it was a huge hit. Despite all the production problems, the movie was a huge success. Horror fans and drama fans alike loved the movie, but it went through 3 different directors. I want to make that point clear. It went through 3 different directors to make sure that everything went through, and they kept a little bit from each director. Mostly, what Rupert Julian had shot became the film itself, but then they added on a little bit from this and that. They took out the stupid comedic relief element. I don't know where they thought that was going to be a good idea. I understand listening to your audience, but it's like, this is a horror movie, you know? One of the worst aspects, Jason Lives, Friday the 13th Part 6, is one of the best, if not the best, Friday the 13th movie. There's only one bad aspect of it, and it's the stupid comic relief people. It's the paintballers in that movie that I cannot stand, and thank God they died horrible deaths because they got on my nerves. Like, that's what I'm saying. It's like, you don't necessarily need comic relief in horror movies. There's a reason why it's called horror, because you want them to be scary. So that's just my 2 cents. How it compares to other adaptations is a good question that nobody in this room asks, because I'm doing it all by myself because I'm down here alone in the catacombs of Paris Opera House in Paris, France. But
What has he had?
it's difficult. I don't think it really compares to any of them. All the theatrical version, well, all the versions of the Phantom of the Opera, whether they're theatrical or were on TV, there's an animated version, of course the Andrew Lloyd Webber musical, I mean, they all have their charms. There's beautiful things that are from all of them, and they're all really great, but this set the standard, and it was the hardest standard to follow. And I think anybody would agree with that about any of the classic Universal horror monsters. It was hard to redo Dracula. I mean, there really wasn't a great remake of Dracula, one that stuck with people until Francis Ford Coppola's Bram Stoker's Dracula. And even it didn't do well at the box office, but it became a cult hit afterwards. So people remember that one more than any of the other like Hammer horror ones. I mean, there have been so many adaptations of Dracula that it's hard to keep up with. But really, the one that sticks out the most, that will always stick out the most, is Bela Lugosi's. I mean, there's really no one that can compare to what he did. And we're finding that out more and more as time goes on. Like, you know, they've done 2 Wolfman remakes, both flopped. Nobody liked them. Guillermo del Toro is doing a Frankenstein. There's going to be a new Frankenstein coming out, and I'm curious to see, because he's a great director. He makes good movies. Some of the first looks that I've seen of the monster look really good, so I'm cautiously optimistic about that one. But it's like, again, that's another franchise where they've tried to reboot it a million times, and there's not been really any real memorable remakes. The only one that sticks out is the Boris Karloff version from 1931, and I mean, rightly so, because it was groundbreaking at the time. All of those movies are groundbreaking, and that's the thing about the Phantom of the Opera, is that it's really hard to match up to what Lon Chaney did in 1925. Claude Rains did a great job. Herbert Lom in 1962 did a great job. I mean, they do well with what they have, but the movie itself, the overall performance, it really relies on the melodrama and the terror that the actor can bring. And so there was really only one actor that's been able to do that perfectly, and that's Lon Chaney. So, I mean, without a doubt, without hesitation, I would say it to the directors of all the other versions' faces. The 1925 Phantom of the Opera is the best Phantom of the Opera, without a doubt. And there's plenty of other great ones as well. The Robert Englund version from 1989, they took the Phantom of the Opera and made him a slasher. It was a slasher movie. I love that. I think that's great. And I have a soft spot in my heart for the Gerard Butler Andrew Lloyd Webber musical version from 2004. I think that's a pretty good film too. Was he the best choice? Probably not, but I still liked it. You know, it's still a fun film, but you'd be hard pressed to find anybody that can really compare to what Lon Chaney brought to that role. And the overall impact that this movie brought, like I said, it really started the horror genre. It was the movie that people looked at and said, oh, so this is what we have to stride to. This is what we have to achieve in order to make a great horror movie. And that's why there weren't a whole lot. I mean, there were horror movies in the 20s. There were plenty of horror movies in the 20s, but name one. Go ahead, you know. What's the first one that comes to mind? The first one that always comes to mind is the Phantom of the Opera, or Nosferatu. Sorry, Nosferatu. But again, a lot of people didn't see Nosferatu in the 20s. A lot of people didn't see it till like the 1980s when the rights were finally let go and people were allowed to see it. I think, did it go into the public domain? I'm not sure about that. We'll put it on the screen here. But yeah, eventually Nosferatu came out and people got to see it. But when you think of movies at that time that people would flock to get scared, the Phantom of the Opera is the one that they go to. And then it really took until the 30s for that to take off. And Universal became the home of horror for many decades. So, you know, I don't think we would have horror if we didn't have A, Universal Studios, and B, Lon Chaney. I don't think horror would exist, in at least in the United States, if we didn't have those two elements. And obviously, the Phantom of the Opera was the catalyst that started horror for Universal and catapulted them into, I mean, infamy with what they have done with these horror films. So, without that, we wouldn't have anything. You wouldn't pee your pants anywhere, except right now, because I wanted to, and I've never felt, I did it like 3 or 4 minutes ago, never felt better. Ew. So happy 100th anniversary to The Phantom of the Opera, starring Lon Chaney from Universal Pictures. It is one of the greatest movies of all time, and I hold it right here in my heart. It's really, truly one of the greatest films ever made. So happy 100th birthday to The Phantom of the Opera. Of course, it's not actually the 100th anniversary. I believe this movie came out officially on November 15th, 1925, but I mean, we're all celebrating it during October. It's the Halloween month. Of course, we're going to celebrate it now. But we love you, Phantom of the Opera. Happy 100th anniversary to the GOAT. And see, now you're waiting for me to end this episode with something spooky, something scary. Well, luckily for you, there's only one way to end this episode, and it's the scariest way possible.
3, 2, 3, 4, 4, 2, 3, and...
These men are pawns. I put a price of 20,000 dirham on their heads.
Next, they will be hailed as the two messengers of God.
They were just a couple of songwriters who came to Ishtar to break into show business.